I walked into the Montgomery County Domestic Relations Court with nothing but a thin folder and a black notebook. Across the aisle, my husband sat next to his shark of a lawyer, looking at me like I was an expired coupon. He actually chuckled at the empty chair beside me. He thought I was just a dependent wife. But he forgot one thing. I paid his medical school tuition for 6 years, and I kept every single receipt. My name is Brianna Hart, and at 31 years old, I was walking toward the plaintiff's table in the Montgomery County Domestic Relations Court in Dayton, Ohio. I did not have a team of associates carrying boxes of discovery. I did not have a high-priced litigator whispering strategy in my ear. I carried only a thin manila folder and a simple black notebook. Across the aisle sat my husband, Dr. Caleb Rourke. He looked pristine in his tailored navy suit, the same one I had picked out for his fellowship interviews 3 years ago. Beside him was Grant Sutter, a divorce attorney known locally as the shark who ate other sharks. Caleb looked comfortable, bored even, checking his watch as if this were just a mandatory staff meeting he could not wait to leave so he could get back to saving lives. When Caleb saw me take my seat alone, he let out a soft, audible chuckle. It echoed in the room, which was silent as a coffin lid. He glanced at the empty chair beside me, then at Sutter, and then back at me with a look of pity that made my stomach turn. "You really came alone. Bree, this isn't a grocery run," he whispered across the gap, his voice dripping with faux concern. Judge Marlowe entered, and the proceedings began. Sutter wasted no time painting me as a burden. He stood up, adjusting his silk tie, and addressed the court with a practiced, condescending baritone. "Your Honor, we are dealing with a dependent wife who is frankly emotional," Sutter said, gesturing vaguely in my direction. "Miss Hart has no understanding of high-level finances. These accusations of hidden assets are nothing more than fantasies concocted by a woman who refuses to accept the reality of her situation. She is simply trying to extract more money because she cannot support herself. It is a waste of the court's time." I sat perfectly still. I did not cry. I did not shout. I did not look at the floor. When the judge acknowledged me, I opened my black notebook to the very first page. My hands were steady. "Your Honor, I am not asking for more alimony today," I said, my voice cutting through the stale air of the courtroom. "I am simply asking for clarification regarding a discrepancy in Dr. Rourke's financial disclosure. Specifically, the account labeled Bridge Tuition Reserve." The air left the room. It was a small thing, a micro-reaction that most people would have missed. But I had spent 6 years studying Caleb Rourke. He froze. His hand, which had been idly tapping a pen against the table, stopped mid-air. It lasted less than a second before he recovered his composure. But it was enough. Judge Marlowe, who had been reviewing paperwork with a bored expression, looked up sharply. She had seen it too. Sutter tried to intervene, blustering about relevance. But I pressed on, sliding a single piece of paper toward the clerk. "Mr. Sutter claims I do not understand finance. Perhaps he is right, but I do know how to read a routing number," I said, looking directly at Caleb. "If this asset does not exist, as my husband claims, then surely there is no harm in producing the transaction history for the last 24 months. The judge narrowed her eyes at the defense table. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Caleb shifted in his seat, his confidence evaporating like mist. "Counselor," Judge Marlowe said, her voice leaving no room for argument, "have your client produce all statements related to the bridge entity within 7 days. No redactions." Caleb's confident smile, the one he had worn since he walked in, was cut in half. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months. There was no pity in his eyes now. There was fear. He realized the chessboard had changed, but he did not yet know how deep the trap went. As I gathered my thin folder and prepared to leave, I felt a strange sense of calm. They thought I was there to beg for scraps from the table I had built. They were wrong. I did not come to this court to ask for sympathy. I came to take away his right to lie, to understand how I ended up alone in that courtroom. You have to understand the girl I was 6 years ago. Back then, my life was a blur of caffeine and exhaustion. I worked 2 jobs to keep my head above water. By day, I was an administrative assistant at a logistics firm, drowning in paperwork from 8 to 5. By night, I was a bartender at a dive bar downtown, pouring cheap whiskey and dodging grabby hands until 2 in the morning. My schedule was tighter than a drum, and my bank account was a revolving door. I met Caleb at a community clinic where I volunteered on the rare Saturdays I had off. He was not the arrogant man in the tailored suit back then. He was a volunteer, wearing worn-out scrubs and a smile that seemed too gentle for this world. He told me he wanted to be a doctor to save lives, not to make money. I just want to make a difference, Brianna. But the system makes it so hard for people like me. He told me one night over cold diner coffee. That was the hook. He laid out the plan with the precision of a surgeon. It was just 6 years. He said, 6 years of medical school tuition, board exam fees, textbooks that cost more than my rent, and travel costs for residency interviews. He painted a picture of a future where we would help people together, where my sacrifice would be the foundation of his greatness. My parents, Gordon and Elaine, were enamored with him from the moment they shook his hand. To them, having a son-in-law who was going to be a doctor was the ultimate status symbol. You are so lucky, Brianna. My mother told me, clutching Caleb's arm a little too tightly at dinner. A man with ambition like this, you do whatever it takes to support him. He is going places. My sister, Tessa, was the only one who did not seem immediately starstruck, though her skepticism felt more like a game than genuine concern. She sat on my kitchen counter, looking effortlessly beautiful in a dress that cost half my weekly paycheck, swinging her legs. So, let me get this straight. You pay for everything now, and he gets the fancy title later, she asked, popping a grape into her mouth. That is a lot of investment. Sis, who pays you back? If he decides he likes the view from the top better without you. She laughed afterwards, like it was just a silly joke. But the question hung in the air. I ignored it. I was in love, and I believed in the partnership. I took the small inheritance my grandmother had left me money I had been saving for a down payment on a house, and I wrote the first check for his tuition. I will pay you back double. Bree, Caleb promised me, holding my hands in his. Every penny, I swear. That was when the control started, wrapped in the guise of kindness. A few months into his first year, he suggested that he take over managing our finances. He argued that since he was studying so much, he needed to feel useful, and he was naturally good with numbers. You work so hard, baby. Let me handle the boring stuff, he said, kissing my forehead. You do not need to worry your pretty head about utility bills and interest rates. I have got it. It sounded so sweet. It sounded like partnership. Slowly, my name came off the primary accounts. I was given a secondary credit card with a daily spending limit. When I asked about it, he told me it was just to help us budget better for his loans. I thought it was financial discipline. I thought we were a team tightening our belts for the future, but then the seeds of doubt began to sprout. Whenever I asked specifically about how much a certain semester cost or why the savings account looked lower than expected, his demeanor would shift. He would laugh, a low chuckle that didn't reach his eyes. You would not understand the complexity of these loan structures. Bree, he would say, patting my hand, why do you ask, do you not trust me? He would smile, but his eyes were cold, scanning my face as if calculating whether I was becoming a liability. I learned to stop asking. I learned to be the supportive wife. I did not know then that I was financing my own destruction. The next 6 years dissolved into a gray fog of tuition payments, exam fees, and rent checks for apartments that were always conveniently located 5 minutes from his campus, but 40 minutes from my job. I paid for it all. I paid with my salary, my tips, and eventually, my health. I slept in 3-hour bursts, waking up with my heart pounding, terrified I had missed a shift or a bill payment, Caleb was a master of the contradictory demand. He would hold me when I was shaking from exhaustion, stroking my hair with a touch that felt almost genuine. "Baby, you are working too hard. I hate seeing you like this," he would whisper into my ear. But 2 days later, he would come home with a furrowed brow and a flyer for a mandatory networking gala or an urgent seminar in Chicago. "I know things are tight, Bree, but if I don't go to this conference, I won't get the residency match we want. It is just $500 for the flight. Can we make it work? Please." And I always made it work. I picked up extra shifts. I skipped lunch. I stopped buying clothes. Our apartment ceased to be a home and transformed into a shrine to his ambition. It was a library where silence was the only law. I stopped inviting friends over because Caleb claimed their laughter broke his concentration. I need total focus. "Brianna, do you want me to fail?" He would snap if I laughed too loud on the phone. Then, just as I felt I was about to snap, he would bring home a small gift, a pair of earrings, a handbag on clearance. He would present them like they were crown jewels. "See, I am not a bad guy." "Right, I take care of you," he would say, watching my reaction closely. My parents made it worse. Gordon and Elaine treated Caleb like the son they never had. Every Sunday dinner was a celebration of his latest test score or his rotation evaluation. I was just the logistics manager. "You need to be softer with him, Brianna." My mother lectured me while we washed dishes. "He is under immense pressure. Stop nagging him about the electric bill. Do you want him to worry about lights when he is learning to save lives?" Then there was Tessa. My sister started coming over more often, claiming she wanted to help me with the housework since I was so busy. Yet, she only seemed to appear when Caleb was studying in the living room. She would wear tight yoga pants or low-cut tops, smelling of expensive vanilla and jasmine. "Hey, just thought I would bring you guys some takeout," she would say, leaning over Caleb's shoulder to look at his anatomy textbook. "Wow, Caleb, you are so smart. I don't know how you memorize all this." I would come home from a double shift to find them laughing on the couch. When I walked in, the laughter would die instantly. Later, I would smell her perfume clinging to the fabric of the sofa cushion where he sat. When I brought it up, Caleb called me paranoid. "She is your sister, Bree. That is disgusting." "You are acting crazy," he said, shaking his head with a look of disappointment that made me feel small, but the math started nagging at me. I was exhausted, but I was not stupid. I began noticing that the receipts he gave me for textbooks or lab fees did not always match the withdrawals from our joint account. There was always a gap. $50 here, $100 there. The university system is a dinosaur. Bree, he explained smoothly when I pointed it out. They process the fees late, or sometimes they bundle charges. It is just administrative lag. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But then came the Tuesday evening at the grocery store. I was buying basics, rice, beans, chicken, and a few vegetables. When I swiped our card, the machine beeped a harsh rejection tone. Declined. I called Caleb, panic rising in my throat. "Caleb, the card was declined." "I have a line of people behind me. What is going on?" He laughed on the other end of the line, casual and relaxed. "Oh, that I lowered the daily limit. Babe, you have been going a little crazy with the organic stuff lately. I just thought we needed to tighten up." I stood there, humiliated, putting items back on the shelf while the cashier rolled her eyes. I did not fight him when I got home. I did not scream. I felt myself shrink inward, becoming something smaller and harder. But that night, I took a small black notebook from the clearance bin at the store. I wrote down the date. I wrote down the amount he claimed the limit was. I wrote down the lie. It was not a strategy yet. It was just a reflex, a way to prove to myself that I was not the crazy one. The night Caleb finally put on that long white coat, my parents threw a party that looked more like a coronation. My mother, Elaine, held court in the living room, clinking her champagne glass and telling anyone who would listen about her brilliant son-in-law, the doctor. Meanwhile, I was in the kitchen, scraping deviled eggs off a tray and refilling the ice bucket. I was not the wife of the guest of honor. I was the hired help who happened to pay the mortgage. I stepped out the back door to dump a bag of trash, enjoying the cool air for a second. That was when I heard low voices coming from the shadow of the oak tree near the fence. It was Caleb. "Everything is almost fine. We do not have to wait anymore," he whispered, his voice thick with a kind of excitement I had not heard in years. Then came the giggle. It was a sound I had known my whole life. Tessa. My blood ran cold. I walked back inside, my hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped the empty ice bucket. On the kitchen counter, Caleb's iPad sat charging. We shared an ID because he claimed it was easier for managing the bills. The screen lit up with a notification. It was a message from Tessa. I swiped it open. There was a photo of her wearing a red dress, one I had seen in her closet last week, and the caption read, "I want to be Mrs. Rourke." I marched into the living room, the iPad clutched to my chest like a shield. I found my parents in the corner. I shoved the screen in their faces. "Did you know?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Did you know about this?" I expected shock. I expected outrage. Instead, my father looked at his shoes, and my mother let out a long, weary sigh. "Brianna, please," she said, looking around to make sure the guests were not watching. "Don't make a big deal out of this. Men. They have needs. And Tessa. She is just better suited for the lifestyle Caleb is entering. You are so rigid." The world stopped. They did not just know. They approved. The axe fell exactly 10 days later. Caleb had just signed his contract with a prestigious private hospital in Cincinnati. He did not yell. He did not fight. He sat me down at the kitchen table and spoke like he was delivering a diagnosis. "I am moving out. Bree," he said, checking his cuticles. "I need someone more suitable for my new standing. You have been great. Really helpful. But we are just in different tax brackets now." Emotionally speaking, I was still reeling from the shock when the letter came. It was a statement for a student loan consolidation. The balance was astronomical. But the name on the primary borrower line was not Caleb Rourke. It was Brianna Hart. "What is this?" I asked him when he came to collect his books. "You signed it. Remember," he said, shrugging with maddening casualness. "Last year, when you were tired after that double shift, it is fine. You have good credit. I did not remember. I never signed that." Then the final humiliation arrived. My cousin called me, hesitating before she told me what Tessa was saying around town. "My sister was telling people that I was just the launch pad. She was saying I was the booster rocket that fell into the ocean so the shuttle could go to space. Caleb filed for divorce before I could even find a lawyer. His petition demanded a fair split of assets and, audaciously, spousal support from me since he technically had no income yet. Attached to the proposal was a non-disclosure agreement. He wanted to buy my silence to protect his reputation in the medical community." Standing in my empty living room, looking at the papers, I realized the truth. This was not a heartbreak. This was a heist. He had not just fallen out of love. He had systematically drained me of my money, my youth, and my family support, and now he was locking the door from the outside. The war did not start with a scream. It started with a notification on my phone screen. I tried to buy a coffee on my way to work, and the terminal beeped that humiliating low tone. The barista looked at me with pity as she handed the card back. "It says pickup card." "Honey." "I have to cut it," she said. I opened my banking app, my heart hammering against my ribs. The screen was grayed out. A red banner across the top read, "Restricted. Contact primary holder." Caleb had not just left, he had nuked the financial bridge behind him. By noon, the administrative violence escalated. My landlord sent an email with the subject line, "Lease Adjustment Protocol." It stated that due to a change in the household income status, I was considered a high-risk tenant. He demanded a new security deposit of $2,500, payable only by cashier's check, within 72 hours. It was impossible. It was a squeeze designed to force me out onto the street. Then came the call from Human Resources at Cedar Lane Benefit Services. I walked into the sterile office to find my manager looking uncomfortable. "Brianna, we received a call regarding your stability," she said, sliding a box of tissues toward me. A concern was raised about erratic behavior and potential data mishandling due to personal stress. "We just want to make sure you are okay to handle sensitive files." They did not say his name, but his fingerprints were all over it. Grant Sutter, his lawyer, was already spinning the narrative. In his emails to my personal account, he painted a picture of me that was unrecognizable. He called me emotional. He called me unstable. He claimed I was inventing secret accounts to cope with the trauma of rejection. Then came the olive branch, wrapped in barbed wire. Caleb sent a settlement offer. It was a lump sum of $10,000, enough to pay the landlord and buy groceries for a few months. But the attachment was thick. It required me to sign a non-disclosure agreement, withdraw all requests for financial audits, and permanently waive my right to contact the medical board or his hospital. I called my parents, desperate for a sanity check. "Take the money." "Brianna," my father said, his voice flat. "He is being generous, considering everything," my mother added, her voice shrill over the speakerphone. "Don't be selfish. You need to think about the family. Tessa, she fits this world. Don't ruin her chance just because you are bitter. A scandal could ruin Caleb's career, and then where would your sister be?" I hung up. I felt like I was physically falling, wind rushing past my ears. I logged into a credit monitoring site, my fingers trembling. I pulled my full report. There, at the bottom, was a line of credit opened 3 months ago using our old apartment address. $15,000. It was maxed out. I sat in my dark living room. The panic wanted to come out. It wanted me to scream, to drive to his new condo and pound on the door, to call Tessa and scream obscenities. That was what they wanted. They wanted the crazy ex-wife. They wanted the emotional wreck who proved Grant Sutter right. Instead, I took a deep breath. I picked up the phone and dialed the number for the clerk of courts. My voice was steady, void of any tremor. "I need to file an emergency motion for a temporary restraining order on assets," I said to the clerk. "I also need to file a motion to freeze the accumulation of marital debt." I hung up the phone and opened my black notebook. I looked at the columns of numbers I had started tracking years ago. "He wants me to go crazy so he can win," I whispered to the empty room. "But I will be cold as ice, and I will let the paperwork scream for me." My apartment ceased to be a home. It became a bunker. I stopped watching television and started reading textbooks on forensic accounting. I learned the language of student loans, medical billing codes, and the complex structures of limited liability companies as if my life depended on it because it actually did. I treated the federal rules of civil procedure like a holy text. My dining table was the war room. I sorted 6 years of receipts into piles. Tuition transfers, housing stipends, examination fees. Every single time I had transferred money from my savings to his account, I printed the confirmation. I matched them against his class schedules and his rotation logs. I was building a mosaic out of paper scraps. I had help from an unexpected source. Noelle Ramirez, a senior claims manager at Cedar Lane, was a woman made of steel and black coffee. She saw me printing documents late one night and did not scold me for using company resources. She sat down next to me. "You are doing it wrong," she told me, tapping a red pen against my messy stack. "You are looking for logic. Stop it. Look for the anomaly. And remember, if it is not written down, it never happened. If you cannot produce the timestamp, you are just a girl crying in the dark." That advice saved me. I went back to the digital trail with a cold, clinical eye. That was when I found Caleb's fatal mistake. In his arrogance, Or perhaps just his laziness. He had never unlinked his personal laptop from our shared family cloud storage. He assumed I was too technologically illiterate to look there, or perhaps he thought I was too broken to care. One evening, a new folder synced to the shared drive. It was labeled simply Residency Finance 2024. Inside was another subfolder, Practice Bridge. I did not open them immediately. I did not hack anything. I possessed the password. I was an authorized user. I did exactly what Noel taught me. I created a chain of custody. I took screenshots of the file directory. I logged the time, the date, and the source device. Then I downloaded the files, saving them to 3 different encrypted hard drives. I was not a scorned wife snooping. I was an auditor securing evidence. I spent the next 2 weeks learning how to label exhibits. I learned what redaction meant so I could protect my own data while exposing his. I learned how to file a subpoena for bank records without a lawyer. When I finally analyzed the files, the pattern emerged like a tumor on an X-ray. The money I had sent for tuition had not gone directly to the university. It had been funneled through an intermediary account called Bridge Tuition Reserve. From there, it vanished into a maze of transfers before a portion of it was actually paid to the school. Even worse was the partnership agreement. In his divorce filing, Caleb listed his interest in the new private clinic as having 0 value, claiming he was just a junior associate with no equity. But the documents in the folder told a different story. He was a buy-in partner. His share was already worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, shielded by a valuation trick that relied on the divorce being finalized before the fiscal year ended. I practiced my questions in the bathroom mirror every morning. I did not practice shouting.